Today we're going somewhere uncomfortable. We're talking about the war between the United States and Iran, and more specifically about a body of water that most people couldn't point to on a map, but whose disruption is currently shaking the foundations of the global economy, the Strait of Hormuz. We are not here to litigate the rights and wrongs of the conflict. There are serious people doing serious work on that, and it's not our lane. What we are going to do is what we always do. Look at the architecture, look at the systems. Ask why the strait isn't just a choke point on a map. It's the most powerful lever Iran has ever held. And ask how a country that's been sanctioned and isolated for years still managed to build something so consequential that closing a 21-mile wide waterway could send the entire global economy into freefall. That's the story. Let's build it. You can't understand the strait without understanding the long game Iran has been playing. That game starts really with the 2015 nuclear deal, which froze Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Then in 2018, Trump pulled out, sanctions came back, Iran began enriching uranium again. By early 2023, Iran was close enough to nuclear breakout that the raw material for a weapon was accumulating fast. At the same time, its proxy network across the region, Hezbollah, Hamas, allies in Syria, was being systematically dismantled by Israel. One by one, the buffer Iran had spent decades building was removed. By mid-2025, Iran's regional leverage had shrunk considerably. Its economy was in freefall, the rial had collapsed, inflation was punishing ordinary people, shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar were shuttering. The insurance policy it had spent decades building across the region was largely gone, and protests were beginning to surface in ways the regime couldn't easily contain. And yet, it still had the bomb program, and it still had the strait. June 2025, Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facilities. The US follows with Operation Midnight Hammer, B-2 bombers, bunker busters, Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan. Trump calls it contained, decisive, done, the 12-day war. Except it isn't done. The intelligence community's messier read, which the administration disputes, is that Iran had moved much of its enriched uranium before the strikes landed, that the program was set back by months, not years, that the core problem hadn't been solved so much as relocated. Both sides declared it over, neither believed it. The second half of 2025 sees Iran's economy break further under fresh sanctions. By late December, mass protests, the largest since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, erupt across dozens of cities. The crackdown is brutal. The death toll runs into the tens of thousands. In Washington, this changes the calculation. 2 aircraft carrier strike groups are deployed to the Gulf, the largest U.S. naval buildup in the Middle East in over 2 decades. Not a declaration of intent, but a signal impossible to misread. Indirect talks through Oman continue. By late February 2026, a deal feels briefly possible. Oman's foreign minister signals Iran has agreed to degrade its uranium stockpiles. 2 days later, Operation Epic Fury begins. This one is different. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is killed. Iran's succession body loses its meeting place in the same strikes. Iran retaliates across the entire region, ports, military bases, gas facilities. Qatar Energy declares force majeure, pulling 21% of global LNG supply off the market overnight. And for the first time in decades of threatening it, Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz. 21 miles wide at its narrowest, the navigable shipping lanes, just 2 miles in each direction. Through those 4 miles of open water, roughly 20 million barrels of oil move every single day, about 20% of the world's total consumption, around 30% of all seaborne crude, nearly a quarter of global LNG trade. There is no functional alternative. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have pipelines that together at maximum capacity can handle about 17% of the normal Hormuz volumes. If the strait closes, 83% of what normally flows through it has nowhere to go. And here's the part that makes this a build-to-brand story rather than just a military one. Iran isn't making an economic argument at the Strait of Hormuz. It's making an existential one. The message is this: if you come for us, if you bomb our facilities, kill our leaders, attempt to erase our nuclear program, we will make the cost so catastrophic for the global economy that the world will eventually force you to stop. Not because we can beat you militarily, we can't, but because no one, not China, not India, not Japan, not Europe, can afford 20% of the world's oil supply to simply vanish. Iran has known this for a very long time. Every time relations with the West deteriorated, the tanker war of 1987-88, the nuclear standoffs of the 2000s and 2010s, every round of sanctions, Iran dusted off the threat, closed the strait, collapsed the oil market, forced the world to the table. They never had to follow through. The threat was the product. The mere belief that Iran might do it was enough to shape the diplomatic calculations of every government that dealt with Iran across 50 years. It made Iran bigger than it looked on paper. What's different now is that for the first time, they've actually done it, and the results are already visible. Oil has crossed $100 a barrel. Natural gas prices in Europe and Asia have surged over 50% in a week. And fertilizer costs are rising fast enough to threaten food supply chains across multiple continents. The strait is not fully open, but it's no longer uniformly closed either. On March 5, Iran announced the blockade applies specifically to ships from the US, Israel, and their Western allies. Since then, selective passage has begun. A Turkish vessel, 2 Indian-flagged gas carriers, a Saudi tanker. Iran is using the strait as a sorting mechanism. Countries it needs relationships with are being let through. The West is still blocked. Iran's new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, son of the man killed in February 28 strikes, made the position explicit in his first public statement. The strait stays closed. Washington's response has been, to put it generously, inconsistent. The Energy Secretary said publicly that the Navy isn't ready to escort tankers through the strait. Hours later, the Treasury Secretary said escorts would begin as soon as militarily possible. A social media post claiming a ship had already been successfully escorted through was deleted after the White House confirmed it was false, and the Defense Secretary told the public not to worry about it. Former senior naval officers described any escort attempt under current conditions as suicidal. Iran stated it would actively welcome such an attempt, meaning it is prepared to fire on US vessels in the waterway. On March 11, 3 commercial vessels were attacked near the strait, a reminder that the threat is ongoing rather than theoretical. In the background, something quietly strategic is also playing out. Russia's competitive position in global oil markets is improving as buyers scramble for alternatives. The shadow fleet, the informal network of tankers built originally to move sanctioned Iranian and Russian crude, operating outside normal insurance and tracking systems, is now the only maritime infrastructure still moving cargo anywhere near the disruption zone. The rule-based order of international shipping is bending in ways that will outlast this conflict. The IAEA has confirmed Iran had hidden highly enriched uranium in an underground facility that survived all the strikes. The nuclear question, the one that triggered the sequence, remains completely unresolved. The Strait of Hormuz is Iran's most important brand asset. And like all the brand assets, it took decades to build, cost almost nothing to maintain, and derived its entire power from the belief that using it would be too painful for everyone, including Iran. For years, that belief was the product. Iran didn't need to close the strait, it just needed everyone to believe it could. That belief shaped negotiations, shaped sanctions policy, shaped the diplomatic calculus of every administration that dealt with Tehran for 50 years. It made Iran bigger than it looked. It gave a sanctioned, isolated country a permanent seat at the table of global consequence. The Strait was always the endgame card. Iran just played it. And what's interesting about how they've played it is the selective reopening. This isn't a blunt instrument anymore. It's becoming a negotiating table. Iran decides who passes. Turkey gets through, India gets through, Saudi Arabia gets through. The West doesn't. That's not chaos. That's a deliberate signal about who Iran needs relationships with and who it's using the Strait to pressure. The leverage has become surgical. Whether that forces a ceasefire, fractures the international coalition, gives Iran a seat at a negotiating table it wouldn't otherwise have, or simply prolongs a catastrophic conflict for everyone, we don't know yet. Trump says there is practically nothing left to bomb. Israel says operations continue with no time limit, and when asked how the war ends, Trump's own envoy said 3 words: I don't know. The architecture doesn't guarantee the result, but it does explain the logic. And understanding the logic is always on the show, where we start. That's Built to Brand. Stay close. This one is still moving.